one of, I think, the most fascinating chapters in Jeremiah, and I think probably in the entirety of the Bible, is Jeremiah 36. There's just so much going on here. It's a chapter that involves Jeremiah and his personal scribe, Baruch, and the composition of a written text of a scroll and the destruction of that scroll and the rewriting of that scroll. And it brings up all these marvelous questions about sort of more generally about authorship and about what text is and what prophecy is and how we know what we're reading. And I'd just love to spend some time on this. Do you want to set the scene for why is a scroll being written and why does it get destroyed and why does it get rewritten? And
so, as I've said in an earlier session, Jeremiah can't actually enter the temple. Everyone's mad at him. Mm-hmm. So no one wants him there. But he, of course, persists in his messages. And so he has to have his sofer, his scribe. And at one point, it seems like maybe he's just transcribing exactly what it is that Jeremiah is saying to him. At another point, they may actually be co-authoring. It's sort of unclear. And this also gets to the heart of questions of, it's a wonderful, aside from, being part of the broader story of Jeremiah's prophetic career, it's a wonderful window for us as biblical scholars to learn a little bit more about how texts were understood to be composed.
It's the meta prophetic text.
Exactly, and concepts of authorship. It really destroys any kind of notion we might have of single authorship, especially in this collaboration of Jeremiah and Baruch, and also the idea of where meaning sort of lies. Is it textualized or not? Because we have here a story of a scroll that is composed of precepts and messages that Jeremiah wishes to communicate. It is burned, mm-hmm. And then able to be completely reconstituted by Baruch again.
And with more added.
Of course, right?
No, but okay. This gets to such a thing. So I want to back up a little bit, right? The assumption, I think I said this at the beginning, right? The assumption when we read prophetic books and we read, and then the prophet said this, is it's not that the prophet's the author quite, but that you think you're reading transcription.
Yes.
That's how it's presented to us.
Yes.
And I think that's how it's often taken, right? These are the words of that person in that time.
Of course there is that, which is used in Deuteronomy, this dictum of you shall not add and you shall not take away from it. At the same time, I think that we may be too inflexible in reading that dictum, that sort of scribal motto, in light of the scribe's own understanding of their work. Because so much, I think, and we see this, of course, in Second Temple, literary compositions, sees openings in, invitations within the biblical text for further elaboration that is understood to be a continuity, a complete continuity of that work. So the idea that the scroll would have been burned up, reconstituted, which tells you something about the nature of the existence of text, that it doesn't lie in the text itself, it lies somewhere else, right? The text itself exists without its written artifact, mm-hmm. Can be reconstituted with some extra things too, because maybe it hadn't reached completion in its first iteration.
Yeah. The end of this chapter, and I think this is the part I'm really focused on. Again, they've created a scroll of Jeremiah's words, right? And then they burn it because it's full of terrible things. And then Jeremiah, and the very last verse of the chapter.
But it's they burn it one or two columns at a time, which also is, again, maybe kind of nerdy, but an interesting window into scribal composition that, one column is like a kind of entirety in itself, and then you move on to the next one. Like, why one or two columns at a time?
Right. Well, I mean, and they're reading it, right? It's like they're reading them out loud and then burning it.
Cutting it, burning it.
Which, I mean, clearly there's some like ritualized gesture here, which may say something about, I don't know, like in the same way that we get rid of or dispose of holy texts in certain ways. I don't know if they think this is holy, but there's something going on here that it needs to be treated this way. They take another scroll.
And
right,
this is verse 28.
Right. Right. So in 28 it says, God says, take another scroll and write on it all the former words that were in the first scroll, which the king burned. And then at the end, indeed, Jeremiah took another scroll and gave it to Baruch, who wrote on it at Jeremiah's dictation all the words of the scroll that the king had burned in the fire, and many similar words were added to them. So there's so many ways of thinking about this. I mean, part of my brain is like, so much of biblical literature and prophetic literature is like stock. There's stock phrases, right? And so I can imagine, like, making this up, but I can imagine Jeremiah being like, so the oracle against the Assyrians, and this bit and this bit, and just like fill it out with the standard boilerplate.
Yeah. You know what, we have one thing on Tyre. Maybe we could add a couple more.
Yeah, I was just like, and a little bit more like that. But what's the line between like the vision of the prophet, right? The thing that the prophet has immediate and like direct divine access to, and then the expression of that message in human Israelite prophetic genre.
So I love this because this gets at the heart of the nature of prophecy and and prophetic speech, and what the prophetic word event actually is. And it's something like it's not just the way I'm sort of reading it within the prophetic literature, that it's not just the divine word inhabiting or taking up a human form, but rather a mixing, right? A mixing of the divine message, divine language with human language, the human language that belongs to or is like, embodied within the body of the prophet and all of their learning and all of their participation within literary culture. So like, whereas...
Or even more so, not the prophet, but the person the scribe who's responsible for writing down the prophet. Like, there's the divine, there's the prophetic receptacle,
right,
as it were, but like the turning of that into
material object.
Material object belongs to a professional, right? A literary professional.
Right, and I think we can think productively about how literary composition, in a similar manner of the idea of reward and punishment, is something collective or more collective than or that the idea of it as either collective or individual is contested, right, or is a matter of debate. Because of course Jeremiah, just like Ezekiel will be, is engaged in a critique of transgenerational punishment, a question of whether the present generation should be suffering for the sins of, let's be clear here, King Manasseh, right? If that's who we're alluding to or who's being alluded to, that all that they are experiencing is a result of punishment that they carry with them as a result of their father's doing. And similarly, so, composition, composition is a kind of collective thing, but is it? It's also individual, it's highly individualistic. And then what is this weird role of the scribe here? And of course, especially strange in light of Jeremiah's own critique of scribes.
Yeah. And so this all sort of ties back to, one of the things that obviously biblical scholars are obsessed with is questions of composition. and I think you and I are talking here about sort of a higher level question of, like the cultural composition of texts. But when biblical scholars typically come to Jeremiah, they're like, okay, so we can eliminate all the Deuteronomic-like stuff, right? That's one layer. Mm-hmm. And then we can eliminate all the third-person narrative, because that can't be something, like Jeremiah couldn't have written that. Nobody writes about themselves in the third person. And then what we're left with is, right, and the phrase that's used in scholarship is, right, the ipsissima verba, right, like the very words of the prophet. Jeremiah is the text that biblical scholars historically have been most obsessed with, like, let's get to the actual words of the prophet. And yet it's the book that's got this chapter that absolutely calls into question the capacity to ever really get back to, or even like what it would mean to get back to the words of the actual words of the prophet.
Well, I mean, I think this is also, there's themes of, as in Deuteronomy, like the second iteration of the tablets, right? Like we have like a second text like constituted here after the destruction of the first. I don't think that it's, especially in light of any kind of idea of a new covenant, right? I don't think that it is incidental that we have this story that is about the destruction of a text and then its reconstitution. It's especially tied to this problem of, well, even if we can't get at the ipsissima verba of the prophet, it doesn't really matter, right? Because everything came to pass anyways.
Right. And I mean, and the text that we have, people look at this chapter and talk, is this chapter about this book? Right? Is the scroll that Baruch produces
very meta?
Is that in fact the book of Jeremiah that we're reading, or some version of it? But of course,
but then you'd have to add that. Wait, what?
Right, but of course it's not, right? Like it's a story about a scroll within a scroll, in the same way that, right, like
in Deuteronomy.
Right, exactly. In the same way that, like like when Moses is like this Torah.
Yeah.
It's not this. It's not. Right, it's a story about a Torah inside a Torah.
But they're both, I mean, first of all, I think that we'd have to think more deeply about it, but it might end up being a kind of critique of the Deuteronomic reform, this idea of the stability of books, right? Oh, you found a book in the temple. Oh, okay. And you've done everything wrong, according to that book.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing this makes me think of is the Jewish tradition about the entire Bible being destroyed, and Ezra, right, like rewriting the entire thing. So that what we have actually is Ezra's like remembered, rewritten text.
Just as valid.
I mean, not just as valid, the only valid.
Yeah.
Right? It's the only thing we've got. And like, so whatever. Jeremiah seems to me to speak very much in this chapter and maybe throughout to the notion of like getting obsessive about like the exact words isn't really what it's about here, or even being obsessive about like the historical location of the actual physical object of the whatever.
It doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter.
And I think this also speaks to like his persecution, right?
Complex. His persecution complex.
Yeah, that no matter what they do to him, even if they destroy his scroll, comes right back, right? That it doesn't matter, and that these sort of like vagaries of history are sort of inconsequential in light of a kind of cosmic understanding of text.